World War II has always been a fascinating topic for me. Even as a child, I remember my mother scanning the newly purchased Britannica World Encyclopedia volume set that sat on our kitchen table. I remember them clearly. It was a white set of books that laid over the table. A fascinating set of information. I must admit, my mother was a very inquisitive woman. She was one of intelligent understanding. She had been the secretary of a solicitor. She understood law. She understood the application of law. And so literature had always been a keen part of my childhood. And I remember poring over those books that, as we came to the Second World War feature and we spoke about Hitler in detail, my mother never had anything bad to say about Hitler. And this is extremely strange because the accepted literature, the accepted understanding of who Hitler was and the involvement of Germany in the Second World War and the stories, and there's a huge volume of Second World War movies that were made by Hollywood, and some of the greatest movies, some of the greatest actors. I was just recently watching A Bridge Too Far. There was just famous actor after actor who started in that movie. Sean Connery, Ryan O'Neal, Lee Marvin, Laurence Olivier, Gene Hackman. I'm going to think of some others as well, I'm sure. Anthony Quinn. So the list goes on. So, the amount of money and the amount of the measure of energy that went into these huge production sets of Hollywood was phenomenal. And that was the era that I was brought up in. I was born at the outset of the Vietnam War, 1966, and so I remember a relative of mine who was stationed at Phuoc Thu in Vietnam. So wartime has always been an interesting topic for me as a child, and I have never been scared to investigate. I've never feared investigating and researching and learning about these wars. Ironically, I've had an interesting contrast with a particular friend of mine who was horrified that I had purchased a volume on the SS and the involvement of the SS troops in Germany, and it was a very hardback cover, coloured black and white documentation of the SS regime, and I purchased that through Reader's Digest. We don't get that anymore. We don't see any of these great volumes that come to our door. Very sad. Everything is on the internet, and we don't necessarily get to see what I had in my era, and I miss that. One thing I do remember about this chap who strongly opposed the purchase of the book, the Reader's Digest book that I had purchased on the SS regime. He was quite set back, and he was furious that I had gone to the length to purchase information on the archive of German history. Somewhat strange, isn't it? Why would you race? Why would you hide from history? And I think that's what the world is doing today. The world is hiding itself from history. And tonight we're going to be talking about Dresden, the bombing of Dresden. I've heard so many stories, so many applications in regards to the bombing of Dresden. And I think there is some truth in regards to the Tartarian model, the Tartarian theory of why Germany was destroyed. And it comes down to the fact that there is a certain theory, there's a certain class of people, we call them the controllers, These controllers need to reset the earth. They need to destroy what was and rebuild what is new. And I think there's a race to distort and destroy the Middle East as quick as possible, where Israel can have access in its prolific, pontific, Messiah complex achievement. They believe that Israel, the Middle East belongs to Israel, and the Greater Israel. This is the Greater Israel project. When you start to put things together, you start to, it doesn't matter how long it takes for them to get. It doesn't matter how long it takes this movement, that cult. They are a cult. It doesn't matter how long it takes the cult to gain their objective. And I believe the destruction of Germany was just another chess game, another move of the night to take down the Queen, to remove the sovereign right of the Christian Church. It is the right of the Christian Church. It is the right of royalty. It is the right of the monarchy through Christianity, through Christ, to provide a sovereignty over its people, over her people. His Majesty, Her Majesty, the Commonwealth. We hear all these terms, and of course these terms have a very unique and significant role in language and history. And so when you consider the strategic bombing of Dresden, when you consider the Tartarian perspective, we find bombing raids, we find these squads of bombers going hundreds of miles out of their designated flight plan to bomb these ancient, historic knighthood buildings. You could call them tectonic, which comes from Tartaria. So you've got, that's what Germany was. That's what Germany is. Germany has a long, abiding link to the history of Tartaria. And it's very likely that that's what the First World War and the Second World War was all about. It was all about reset. The controllers. So that's one aspect of Dresden. That's one aspect of the bombing of Germany. Something interesting to discuss, something interesting to pause upon, and to realise something that happened many, many years ago, and to understand that the purpose of the strategic bombing was not necessarily to just bring Germany to its knees, but to destroy a very important historical, classical account of history. What we must understand about Dresden is that during the World War II, this beautiful German land was scorched. It was scorched by the phosphorus bombing campaign. And when those bombs, when they hit the earth, it basically set the ground on fire. The earth absorbed the heat, and that heat was so hot that it was able to travel along the pathway to where people lived, or where people were standing, in which the very feet of those people melted into the very bitumen of where they stood. This is the power of the bombing of Dresden. A Holocaust. A Holocaust definition, the actual definitive meaning of the word Holocaust means to burn alive. And that's important that we remember, that we understand what took place in Dresden. The terrible account, the women, the children, and the men that suffered at the hands of a barbaric, mindless, twisted, crazy, demonic princehood. We're talking about the sons of Satan, who have zero collection of what it takes and what it means to burn someone alive. That is the most horrific It is the most psychopathic, psychological, demented belief. Religion. It's a religion. That's why they do it. It's their religion. It's a satanic religion. Why were all those men suffered at Normandy? All those men suffered at Normandy. Dog Beach, Utah. All those men were just sent onto a beach to be gunned down and to be killed. Who was behind that? Was it the Swedish Jew, Eisenhower? Is he guilty? Was it Winston Churchill, the Jew? Was it Jew Churchill? Was it Roosevelt, the Jew? Maybe it was Montgomery.
RAF heavy bombers assist Marshal Konev's drive into the Reich. The target is Dresden. It was being used to pump German troops into counterattacks against the Russian army not many miles to the east. This strike put a stop to that. The night sky is pitted with aircraft, vari-colored target markers, and the newest German attack device, a scarecrow designed to burst and look like a plane exploding after a direct hit. Static electrical discharge caused by intense cold mars these magnificent bombing shots. The day after the RAF strike at Dresden, B-17 bombers of the 8th United States Air Force gave the city a repeat performance. After these attacks, the German Overseas News Agency said, "This city, hitherto almost untouched, has been carpeted by heavy and super-heavy high explosives and incendiaries. Dresden is a heap of ruins. It has been smashed to atoms." Before these attacks, Dresden was planned as a substitute capital in place of Berlin. After this, Hitler will have to look for a substitute for the substitute.
Another Jew. There is one thing that I can be completely convinced of, and that is that any general who sends his men in front of a firing squad, any general who knows the consequences and the estimate of the amount of men that he's going to lose, when he knows that it's a barbaric decision, you can be sure that these people are the sons of Satan. It's a hard fact to bring that into consideration, but it's a fact. The phosphorus bombs, wherever they fell, incinerated men, women, children, and even the elderly. Take into consideration the animal life as well. Take into consideration the plant life. Everything is just completely obliterated. And I think we tend to always be looking into the future of Armageddon. We look at those prophetic horses, the white horse, the red horse, the black horse, the pale horse. We look at all of those prophetic symbols, and we're consistently placing them into the future. And I think this is a shame. When we read scripture, we must understand that it is God's hand that wrote it. And those writings, the account of what you read, refers to the period. This is the great shame. This is the great deception. We have always been taught that we are to abide by the promises, that we are to read the promises of the book of Proverbs and the book of Psalms, to take comfort from these verses, from this book. And I just think it's not wise that we set aside the book of Revelation as a book that is specifically and only relating to that which is in the future. The horrors enacted upon the German civilian population by this combination of bombings, pillage, rape, and torture by the Red Army produced an incredible trauma in the psyche of the German people. We just would never know the suffering that would continue for those east of the Iron Curtain for decades after half of Europe was essentially given to the Soviets. And you know, the common narrative around the beginning of World War II in Europe is that Germany started it. Germany. It's those Germans. Really? Maybe this is what gave Adolf Hitler his vain thoughts, his mad dream of world domination and an Aryan empire. What we should understand is that, contrary to popular belief, Hitler did not assign priority to the manufacturing of any military hardware prior to the outbreak of World War II, but rather he focused on things like housing construction and improving conditions for the German working man and his family. Likewise, international trade and economic restrictions imposed on Germany. And when the war finally broke out, Hitler and the NASDAQ used strategy. By and large, much of the Hitler's advances into countries like Austria, Czechoslovakia and Poland, these were all in fact taking back territory that was held by Germany before World War I. The implementation of the Treaty of Versailles, many within these former German occupancies were German-speaking citizens. Should it be to your surprise that these citizens, that these German-speaking folk welcomed the reunification of Germany? Germany's actions of moving into Poland and France was a power grab. There's no doubt about that. But again, these nations both held territory whose populations were ethnically German and belonged to German power. These belonged prior to the Treaty of Versailles. And it was these regions that were occupied by Germany. So, even though these areas were not taken back, they weren't taken back because they were under the governance of Poland and France. Poland and Germany technically only took back the pre-treaty of the Versailles German territory where ethnic Germans still lived. And while still leaving the rest of the Poland to be run by the Polish government, Germany had a non-aggression pact with Stalin. And while Britain turned a blind eye, of course, Britain declared war on Germany for invading Poland. It was when Hitler found that Stalin had plans to launch a full-on invasion of Europe that he launched the ill-fated preemptive strike on communist Russia. That's what Hitler wanted to stop. Hitler wanted to stop the encroachment of communist troops, communist uprisings in Europe. And of course, these were coupled with the advancement of Stalin's forces. This gave reason for Germany to step up as a defender of Europe and leader in a sort of united pan-Europeanism, right? We must remember the German occupation of European nations would have been done first and foremost to protect Germany from the Soviets. That's why he did it, folks. He didn't want anything to do with Britain. But that little fat Jew, Churchill, couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand back to see Christian Germany fight off those Jewish Bolsheviks who slaughtered 70, 80 million, which we understand now as the Bolshevik Revolution. You might as well say that Hitler's stand was just as worthy as America's stand in Vietnam, right? See, we don't ever think about that. We know what Vietnam was. Vietnam was one of the worst decisions of America. Once again, when you look at the size, when you look at the true understanding of military and what it is, and what communism is, it's all about killing. How many we can kill. Can we kill 1 million? Can we kill 20 million? We'll just